We're live.
Good morning, everyone. At this time, we'll call the Crow Wing County Budget Committee for May 13th, 2021 to order. And I see Nick is absent for right now, so we'll wait just a couple minutes for him to come back.
Morning, Rosemary.
Good morning.
Didn't even see you sneak in. Didn't even see you come in.
She's always quiet.
You were busy talking.
Aren't I always?
Bell tolls for Nick. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we've been brought to order, Nick, so it's
Perfect. Sorry for the
your
delay.
meeting now.
Welcome to the flurry of a week for for finance. We have the auditors on staff today, and they were on staff or in building yesterday as well. As Debbie made you all aware, we're short a staff member as well. We have our accounting technician. She actually went to Becker County as their highway accountant. So we have an open position, so we had interviews this week. I believe we have 2 candidates that are going to be good opportunities for us to make an offer to. They were deciding this morning on who that's going to be. Hopefully they accept and we can fill that role pretty quickly and keep our department going efficiently. We also got guidance from Treasury this week for the American Rescue Recovery Plan Act. That leaves a lot of questions on the table. It does give us more guidance. The documents that we sent out to you earlier this week, we did send an 8-page fact sheet to you, as well as links to the actual full guidance. The fact sheet is the best one to look at. The 8 pages give you a decent idea of what they think qualifies under the Act. The 151 pages is filled with a lot of questions from Treasury back to counties and states and cities on what do we think qualifies. It's kind of funny that they issue a rule and they call it an interim final rule. I think this is going to be very much like CARES in that we're going to constantly see adjustments to the actual guidance itself. I hope they keep it kind of in line, but we don't currently have guidance on how we're supposed to report back. We know timelines of when we're going to report back. We don't have any other ideas. As far as receiving the funds, by the legislation, we were supposed to receive the funds by May 10th. They issued the guidance on May 10th and our link to request the funds on May 10th. We did submit the required documents for them to send money to us. It does state in the guidance here that it's 4 days from the point that we submit for them to process. I anticipate that's going to take a lot longer, especially with the volume that they are going to be processing through this. I was supposed to receive an email back with a signature link. I still haven't gotten that. So we'll see how long that takes. We will get 50% up front. It's the $6.2 million estimated that we'll get the first round here. We'll get our second tranche a year after the first dollars are deposited. We do have till 2024 to spend all this money, so keep that in mind as we look through all this. Nothing has to be done instantly. We do have time. Along with that, some of the things that were called out in the fact sheet, I don't know if you have that available to you or not, but one of the areas that we can do is public health response. This is money directly related to responding to COVID-19 itself. We can't go back to 2020 and use this funding for the expenses we've already incurred. This is only for future expenses related to COVID-19. Starting from the March 30th date, I believe is the date they called out, forward is what we can spend this money on. That can be on PPE, it can be on housing assistance, it can be on mental health, it can be on substance abuse response. There's a number of things they call out that we can use this money for. So we have a very broad spectrum. Along with that, we do have the ability to recover lost revenues. The formula they have gives us a guide of how we need to calculate this. It is supposed to be aggregated. We're not looking at individual departments on the lost revenue they have there. We're working through what that actually means for us, what we can gain from this, if we can gain anything from that. The formula doesn't necessarily tie out the way that we expect it to, so we're looking for a little more guidance from GFOA. I actually will be going through a webinar with them in the coming weeks to go through what they see. We did a webinar with NACO to get more understanding. All of us are processing this as good as we can, as quickly as we can, to make sure we do it right. Along with that, we can impact the negative economic effects of the public health emergency going forward, whether that be additional economic support to local businesses, or how that looks is really up to you as a board on how we want to do that. We can also help with the hardest hit communities and families through direct assistance, housing, rental assistance, a number of other programs. These are fairly open-ended. We already talked about lost revenues from the local government. We also have the ability to invest in infrastructure. They call out specifically water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So we have the ability to invest the money in that as well. One of the things that I'd like to keep in mind with that, with broadband in particular, the state is going to be investing money into broadband. The cities are getting money to make sure that we work with our local partners and with the state to make sure that we're investing that money wisely as we go forward. That's what we know about the guidance so far. Obviously, we're going to keep digging into this and going through more to figure out what's appropriate and what the reporting looks like. The first report is due in August, and then there will be another one starting quarterly in October.
I think
Any
Commissioner
questions?
Coring has a question for you.
Yep.
Not a question for you, but a question for the county administrator. Tim, maybe this is too early, but just listening to Nick's comments, do you think that you and the county administrator will give direction to county staff on what the county will look like after this is over with? And what I mean is, this is going to be over with, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen again. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, are we going to, things that aren't perishable, like are we going to have a stockpile of different things so that we are prepared into the future? I can't think of anything off the top. I can think of masks and PPE and I can't think of a lot of the other stuff now, but do you think that maybe that will be some direction that you'll think of that, or give staff to try to, so that we're prepared just in case something like this happens again?
I think it's a really good point, and preparedness efforts we've been engaged in all along. Most of the time, the PPE and the equipment needs is aggregated at the state level, and then we access it through our FEMA contacts. I don't know if it makes good sense for us to accumulate that. I certainly can ask about that. Historically, you try to prepare for these emergencies as best you can and anticipate what they're going to be. Natural disasters are much more common than a public health emergency, so you tend to prepare more for the one than for the other. That said, for my 27-year career, I know I've practiced a pandemic at least 3 times. And so those preparedness efforts, I want to give you the assurance, those preparedness efforts are ongoing all the time. And you guys have seen that in the all hazards emergency plan. which comes around to your table once every 5 years. So the planning efforts are ongoing. Stockpiling, I don't know yet. I think that might make sense to do at the state level, but I'll ask about it. It's a good question.
I would just add, I think that one of the precautionary steps we take is building our fund balance so that we're prepared for some of these incidences, but I think that stockpiling is difficult in terms, some of this stuff has a time-sensitive life to it, and we can't just store it forever. And then there's the availability from providers who make these items, and whether or not they have a stockpile to give out to various local government units. So, I mean, it's a direction approach to figuring out whether you actually stockpile things or not. So things that aren't perishable certainly could be considered, but we want to take a look at that real closely. And problem is, it's all unpredictable.
Correct, yeah. And I agree, fund balance is probably, that's probably a very good idea, so that we're, financially, we're in a position to
Right.
be able to buy stuff, yeah.
Keep in mind that this funding cannot be put away for rainy day funds.
Right.
That is called out specifically in here, so we're not able to just set this money aside for that inevitability of, or that opportunity that when that does come, we have the funds available. So this money is intended to be invested, whether that be in CIP projects for us, broadband, or in the community. That's what this money was intended for. They will not allow us to build fund balance with this money directly.
Can I ask another question?
Sure, go ahead, Commissioner.
So
Gordon.
Nick, do we know, throughout all of Crow Wing County, how many households or how many units or how many people are lacking broadband? Do we know that number?
Have that answer? Or at least an idea?
Mr. Chair? Commissioner, you have a really good question. Again, broadband
Always.
is this big, and I am getting kind of nervous about that I might be over my head. We are looking at broadband expansion within the county, and there are maps at the state level, the Office of Broadband Assistance, that shows where we have unserved or underserved areas in our community. Those maps are not at the granular level. They're at the census block level. Census block is a pretty big area, and the way it has historically worked in the broadband field is if there is coverage somewhere within the census block, the internet service provider can count the entire census block as covered. In reality, on the street, what we have found is that isn't necessarily served. Places on the map that show as served, when they call the internet service provider for that area, too often get the answer, you still can't get internet. And so having it identified on the map as served keeps everybody else out. And so it's going to be tricky for us to try to get that wall-to-wall broadband. I do think it's a possibility here, and so we're exploring it. What I do want to float to you is you may wish to think about, I may need some help with this one. I'm not an expert in broadband. I don't know telecommunications regulations. I don't know internet speeds. I don't know the technology behind it. I only know enough to be dangerous. I'm starting to feel a little bit like I'm getting in and over my head.
Tim, do you think that we could reach out to our friends at Consolidated Telephone? And I would think that they would kind of have a handle on at least some of it.
Our local partners are, I think, willing to help to inform our judgment. I think we also have to be careful because they're a potential vendor
Right,
to do it.
right.
And so we have to maintain at least an arm's length distance from those who might compete for the business. So to this point, I have been picking the brains of the local internet service providers that will visit with me. That's how I've gotten what I've gotten. It's the only way I've gotten what I've gotten. So then I'm starting to get nervous. I can't keep relying on them for that.
Just some direction from at least just one, I can speak as one, but I guess for me to be able to make a decision on this money in the future, I need to kind of know how much is underserved and I just, and kind of a dollar amount. I guess I'd kind of like to know a dollar amount of how much it would cost to make sure everybody's served in the county. I don't know if that can.
I'll shoot a map your guys' way from the Office of Broadband Assistance, so you can look
Okay.
at that map and see what that map shows. I'm telling you, it's inaccurate. So it's the best I got, but it's inaccurate. I think that might help a little bit.
Yeah.
I want one quick question. Who set the census block approach to broadband?
The federal government. And so, and if you think about it at the federal level, maybe that does make sense. At this, I don't know, at the state level, if the legislature would pass a law requiring them to update those maps at the granular level, it's possible our local internet service providers do. That does not exist at the state level either, and therefore, the best available information we have is at the census block level.
Doug has a question, and then Bill.
Tim, do we know if the state is looking at investing in broadband?
They are.
So how does that work? Because I think maybe it was Nick that mentioned, like rent, help with rent credit. We know the state's already doing that as well. So are we careful that we're not duplicating?
Absolutely. And in fact, I'm not necessarily sure yet at this point whether there is an unmet need there.
Okay.
And if there is an unmet need, think about our role would only potentially be filling in the gap
Right.
if one remains between the state or federal resources and the need. And we're not yet in a position to tell you that we think there's an unmet need. So we are talking. Kara is out talking to landlord groups. She's talking to those who are involved in housing, Lutheran Social Services, Bridges of Hope. She is getting those groups of people together to have the conversations about, is there a remaining unmet need? If so, does the state and federal resources cover it, or is there a gap remaining? I think that's how we can best inform you guys about whether or not you ought to invest any of your limited resources into that
Right.
versus something else.
Yeah, and, Tim, the other areas is, what's this satellite issue going to be for broadband?
It is well,
We got to learn about that.
I am so ill-equipped to tell you what the future of broadband looks like. What I know is fiber to the home. That's the highest quality to the home. But I do also know, I don't believe we can afford to get fiber to every home in Crow Wing County with these funds.
Right.
I do think it is possible that we could get wall-to-wall high-speed. Copper lines you can still use for, in many cases, up to 100 meg service. So using the existing infrastructure, putting in new infrastructure that I think is a better long-term technology, I think that it's potentially within our shooting distance to get wall-to-wall broadband. That's what I'm looking at right now. So
Are we aware,
that's the map.
okay, are we aware too of how many, what the cities and townships are getting for funding?
And I have twice now reached out to the cities and townships in the county, asking if they would like to participate in broadband projects. The number that I got quoted for wall-to-wall was around 17 million.
Okay.
We're talking about putting 6 million in.
Underserved.
If internet service providers would be expected to have a 30% match, if cities and
Which one
towns
is
can
underserved?
participate with us in those projects,
Red.
if the
red.
state can participate with us in those projects, it will be cobbling together the partners that can put that kind of a funding package together to get us there. The funding part of it, I feel quite comfortable with.
Holy
The
cow,
technology parts of it, I'm not as comfortable about.
It's pretty obvious that Doug's district is left out in the dark.
Oh, no.
The lights are off.
I think all 12 should go to District 5.
Well, if you look down in
I
District 1, it
agree.
looks a little red down there, too.
Fort
give you
Ripley
2
looks a little
million.
tough down there.
Wow,
Wow.
that stings.
Wow.
You're asking really good questions. We weren't prepared for a discussion on it, but, so you're getting off the top of my head, all right? In your next board packet, you will have a request to participate with CTC in a grant application through the Small Cities Development Program. So I ran that by Commissioner Cole Hoag to see if he was interested. We'd be the fiscal host. 17 million is the number that I heard, wall to wall. I think that's about a $4 million project, and if it's fully funded, that 4 million comes off the 17. And so you start to see how whittling it away can get us to within striking distance. I don't know if we can get that done at this point in time, but we are looking at it and seeing if that isn't an outcome we could achieve. If we could achieve that outcome for our community, it would be a very noteworthy milestone.
Yep.
This is 2021.
One of the challenges with this map too is I live right about there. I can't hold my thing steady. Right about there. It's blue. I didn't have internet until CTC came through in the last round with CARES. I didn't have internet service, but I was labeled as served.
Yeah, I
So
question
just
that
because
map a little.
that
We heard
area is
that in
blue
Lake-
doesn't necessarily mean that everybody there has coverage.
We heard that in Lake Edward Township, and
Yeah,
you may
that was
recall
Cody Road.
that I exchanged a fair number of emails with one internet service provider who was trying to make the argument that we were duplicating coverage because of the map. I don't really care what the map says. I care what it happens at the household level. And if the map is accurate, then I care about the map, and if the map's not accurate, then I want to go to the household level. And so I think whatever we do in broadband here has that same risk. You're going to hear from some internet service provider who's going to throw around duplication, waste. They're going to throw around these technical terms or jargony political terms to try to persuade us that we shouldn't invest where they're not willing to invest.
Right.
Right.
And what Nick said is very accurate. He was listed in an area that supposedly had internet service, but they didn't. County Road 13 was the same way. It was listed as having internet service. It did not. So looking at these maps really is very, very, you know,
Obviously, they're a high-level map.
yeah.
You're
I-
not drilling down to the household level.
It could be at the household level. There's no reason it can't be. They have the data at the household level. They could provide it at the household level. They
Right.
simply do not.
Road 13, the people just plain
Could we not
didn't have it,
request-
and it said they did.
They won't give it to you.
They won't?
They'll
If
see that as
we- If we're
proprietary.
dangling $6 billion in front of them, they wouldn't provide
I'm not
us-
even sure if we required a 30% local match that they'll participate with us.
This level map serves their purpose much better,
Yeah,
is what it boils down to.
Yes.
yeah, because CTC isn't listed as the provider for County Road 13, another service was. But the people were telling me that they couldn't get internet service, and it's gotten to be kind of a big snafu.
Well, I think these service providers also try to block each other, from going into certain areas, or they,
Yes.
so.
And is it a terrible thing if you ended up having an option between internet service providers? Is that a terrible thing? I think we generally call that competition.
It's
This is
interesting.
this is the issue here, is we see this map, and you can see that there are some holes on there. Do you issue an RFP to try to fill all the holes, thinking, well, there's some concentrated areas in here and some really rural areas in here, and that'll balance itself out? Let's do that. That won't necessarily take into account the existing infrastructure that's there. Where are the existing lines? How close are they? And won't it be most beneficial to use that line and pick up from there, as opposed to plowing in whole new lines to get to that point? What if you divide it into 4 quadrants? You still end up with the same. And so I'm struggling. That's what I'm telling you, is I'm struggling with how in the world do we write this RFP? I don't know. So I am suggesting to you I may need some help on this one.
Is there any communication with school districts? Because they would have a vested interest in the internet also.
I have not yet done so. It's a really good idea, and we will do so.
I don't know that they necessarily know the amount of funding they're going to get yet So they may be a little bit slow to contribute to until they know what they're getting for additional funding as well.
My thought is, though, they should be thinking in those terms, and they should be, the dollar amount will be the dollar amount.
Yep.
But how you address it, they can certainly be planning for that. And then scale it to whatever the dollar amount is when that appears.
Part of our purpose in reaching out to cities and towns as early as we did, and now we've done it twice already, is because we know that other people will be whispering in their ears about the uses of those funds, and we wanted to at least make sure this was on their radar. You can see that there are some areas on the map where it might not make any good sense for them to participate because they already got it. There are other parts of the map where you can see it's going to make really good sense for them to participate with us. And you're right, it is in that northeast and south central and southeast quadrants. Those colors are jumping off the map at you.
Do you think census blocking, census blocking causes consternation for the state legislature when they determine how much money they're going to invest in broadband because they don't see it utilized the way they would like to see it back in their home areas?
It's a mystery to me why the state would accept information at the census block level. I can speculate, but it's probably going to be cynical.
Okay. That's partisan politics. We'll let them deal with it.
Any other questions on that?
I don't think there's any more. So Nick, if you will carry us forward.
So building off of that, we did discuss last time the priority areas that you felt were out in the community, including broadband and high-speed internet. We had childcare, water protection, lost county revenue from prior full fiscal years, evictions and foreclosures, and business economic support. Over the last month, have you had opportunities to build upon that, or are we pretty confident in those are our priority areas at this point?
Thoughts?
Well, the service collaborative we have with the schools, that will be moving forward, and maybe kind of have a separation where they become independent of us, but maybe there would be a chance that we could give some, maybe there's some other organizations out there that we could give some seed money to so that they can, establish themselves well enough so that we then can, back away from our future support, if it's a kind of a one-time support aspect, would be another thought. We could look at some of those types of organizations that we as a county have been committed to and involved in, maybe be able to give us some opportunities to make some changes.
Did you include the capital improvement on that list of priorities that?
Our internal CIP?
Yeah.
That would have to fall under the lost county revenue aspect of it. Because the guidance and the legislation specifically talks about water, sewer, and broadband as the capital improvements that a county can make, we're limited to what our lost revenue portion is being able to be used on pretty much anything that keeps local government functioning. So that would be our CIP. So it would be within that aspect.
Have we heard anything from the small cities, your Emily's and those areas, about their infrastructure needs?
I haven't directly.
Mr. Chair, we have not inquired about infrastructure needs broadly. We have inquired if they are interested in partnering with us on broadband infrastructure.
Right.
They probably will have roads, sewer, water. They'll probably have other competing interests, which is why I wanted to make sure they understood this was one of them early.
Okay, so they would be considering that in their level of responsibility.
We could use the unorganized, I think the unorganized township is getting an allocation, at least I thought so originally. You could consider sewer, water, infrastructure in that area, if you wish. We have the North Long Lake Sanitary Sewer District that takes on a fair amount of water in those pipes. That might be an investment you want to make with just the unorganized territories money. But broadband, the map's gone. The broadband is also something that you can and should consider for the use of some of those, some if not all, of those unorganized territory funds as well.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner?
You know, this, this is kind of bizarre. I mean, it's kind of like being on the airport commission and we got, I think it was like $14 million and we're like scrambling, trying to figure out how to spend this money. I've never seen anything like it before. And now we're scrambling here, trying to figure out how to spend this money. You know, just one question, Tim, is this round, do like all the townships like St. Matthias and Long Lake, are they all getting an allocation too? They are.
Yeah, and I'll send you a copy of the amounts that they're getting
I
and
would
let you
like
know
that.
which ones have favorably said, we would be interested. There's no commitment. They're not making a commitment on broadband. I just asked, are you interested? And so if they're interested, then as we can put this together, I know who to go back and talk to. Here's
When we
what we're going to do.
When we say infrastructure, what if it's a township and there's a road that needs to be tarred?
It needs to be COVID-related. It should be COVID-related.
But there could be somebody going down that road to give somebody a shot, so that could be COVID-related.
I don't want to take responsibility for how they may parse the guidance.
Okay. They could have I think there was something where you get if you get a shot, you get a beer. Wasn't there something like that? So they could-
Yep.
We could,
I think what did they call that?
yeah,
A pint and a poke.
pint and a poke. Oh, wonderful.
So,
And why would you know about that title? So I think of, when I talk infrastructure though, I think of Baxter, which is having trouble with their water treatment. And that could cost upwards of $1 million, which would, I know you're only asking for their interest in sharing their dollars, but that will probably impact the amount that they could
Exactly.
be willing to share with us.
it is reasonable. They also have a significant broadband issue coming. CenturyLink, which owns most of the lines in Brainerd and Baxter, used to have to lease those lines to anybody who wanted to lease those lines to inspire more competition. Not that long ago, they petitioned the FCC to allow them to discontinue that practice. What that means is anybody who was getting service through a leased line, which is a substantial population of the folks in Brainerd and Baxter, are going to lose that service, and their only other alternative would be to go to CenturyLink. I think they might have some interest in maintaining the competition. So, we'll see.
The floor is yours, Nick.
Any other items that anybody's aware of?
I'm curious if, for Kara, when we talk childcare and throwing some dollars at childcare, how do you see that working out?
I should put this on or take it off, I'm so confused. That's a really good question. So part of the ARP funding outside of our county funding is also allocated for childcare at the state level. And I'm not sure how the state is planning on utilizing those dollars, whether that be through grant funding to local childcare providers or what. So we have to pay attention to that. When I say we, I don't mean me, but we wholly through the state have done a really good job at propping up childcare providers in terms of funding. So I don't know that the best choice of our specific funding would be related to childcare at this point. That's something that we're working through, kind of like the rental and mortgage assistance. We're taking a deep dive into that to see what's out there, how do we coordinate with what's out there, and utilize existing resources. So we're really trying to look into that. So we're using this ARP pot of dollars as wisely as we can.
I think we're gonna have to be real sensitive to Administrator Hool's point, making sure that we're only filling gaps where we need to and not overstepping our level of responsibility there, so,
that could be tricky too.
yes.
Exactly.
But, so that'll be one to watch going forward.
Nick, I know you got a whole lot of pages here. I don't know if you're going to go through all those, but I do have another question for Deb as long as she's sitting here. I'm just wondering, Deb, I mean, I think to me, you could relate a lot of things to COVID. And the elections I think with the way they were conducted, mail-in ballots and different things, I think some of that money would be eligible. Do you see anything county-wise that you could point to that we could say, we need to spend this amount of money on future elections, that would, in your mind, qualify for this money?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Coring, one of the things that we did look at was what eligible expenses had been called out during the CARES Act funding with regard to elections. There was a pot of money that was specific to elections separate from the original CARES funding as well. What it talked about is that because jurisdictions have responsibility for conducting elections in their communities, there are certain things that were not going to be considered eligible. So staff time to conduct a regular election is not considered an eligible expense to be paid for from any type of funding that way. Mail balloting, you talked about those types of situations. We could recoup funding costs, or we could consider funding costs for additional temp staff or additional election judges that would be necessary for the processing of those mail ballots. But it would only be the gap between what would have been considered their regular expense to fund the election judges and the people who were going to staff the polling location, and what that cost of doing mail balloting would have been. In a lot of jurisdictions, it's actually cheaper to do the mail balloting than it is to do the funding of a whole election with staff and equipment at those locations. So there wasn't really a huge gap that would have been able for that to be something we could consider in future elections, particularly as all the precincts that did mail balloting in 2020 who had not previously done it specifically passed their resolutions to only do it in 2020. They would have to take additional action if they were going to go down that path. PPE, polling place supplies, sanitation supplies, processes, some of those types of things were more one-time costs that we had to build shields. We have a lot of plexiglass shields we can use in the polling places now, not something we would have that expense to be incurred again in future. And most of the PPE that was non-perishable or that was provided to us by the state free of charge for us, and we were required to return what was not used.
And then, not for today, because I don't know that this is budget committee related, but at some point, I don't know, Deb, if you're following what's happening at the federal level as House File 1, House Senate File 1, on what people are saying, the federal government taking over elections. I guess if you're following that, or I wish you'd be up to speed, so if there's a potential that that's going to pass, I'd like to know how that's going to have an effect on Crow Wing County.
Yeah, and I have been watching that. We've been kind of keeping an eye on some of those different things. There are some provisions that are a little concerning to me and would have some impact on us. I'm kind of waiting until we know that there's going to be action one way or the other, right, before we actually go down a path of what that would be. But I would certainly be happy to put together a synopsis for you as well.
If it looks like it's going to pass, I think we need to know
Absolutely.
how that's going to. Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Deb.
Administrator Houle.
Mr. Chair, members, just to put that into some context about how much we have and what we're our current thinking, because it's just thinking. And if we're off in the weeds, please do tell us. $12 million. We are contemplating 6 for broadband and using that to leverage to the 17. Of the remaining 6, half of that, so a quarter of the total, would be used to reimburse us for the services and the costs, our own costs associated with COVID. That frees up levy, which we can use to build our fund balances back to where we need to. Then the remaining quarter would be for the community needs that are out there, whatever projects that we might show in the hopper. Because of what you were talking about, Commissioner Coring, we are trying hard to make long-term investments here.
Correct.
And that they will outlast COVID. And so broadband, we see as a good long-term investment. And so we're looking for those. Even in the quarter that remains, I would suggest, we should be looking for those. There will be some operational issues, but funding operations comes and goes.
Right.
Funding capital sticks around.
And if I can just say that, that's kind of what I'm looking for, is I'm looking for something that's gonna be long-term rather than, you know, and this maybe sounds kind of mean, but like paying for rooms down at the hotel down here, I just don't agree with that.
There will be operational needs, I'm sure. Someone in the organization is going to say, hey, we need to do this because of COVID. Okay. And we will bring you a process where we'll invite those from inside and outside the organization, and then figure out how we're going to screen those back through. There will be some operating things you're probably going to want to fund. Plus, we also know the state of Minnesota, are they going to give us additional money for economic assistance grants? There's some conversations around about $1 million additionally for Crow Wing. If that passes, that impacts what we do here too, right? So a lot of fluid dynamics going on right now, but it'll settle out.
I think all of that basically says we need to be methodical and take our time to really plan this out, because there's so many dollars floating out there that we need to get our head wrapped around all of it before we really start dedicating to every bit of that.
And just one more thing to add, if I may, just a reminder, this is a little bit different from the CARES Act, where we had 6 months basically to spend it, report it, be done. This is through December 31st of 2024. So we're only going to have 50% of the funds, as Nick mentioned. We're going to have our first tranche is going to be delivered to us now. We're going to have to be methodical not only in what projects that we want to fund, how we're going to fund them, when we're going to fund them, and the fact that we have that 3-year period that we're going to be working through.
It's everything I've got with ARP. More to come, I'm sure, because guidance is going to continue to change. Like I said, that I still can't get over the title of interim final report. How you can have a final rule that's an interim final rule, it doesn't make much sense.
Well, if history repeats itself, we'll be getting updates all the time and changes to what's eligible and what isn't.
A good example of that is last time we talked about how OSA determined that the school districts were subrecipients and we needed to change how we treated them. Auditors came yesterday, and the first thing she told me when she walked in is OSA changed their mind. They're no longer subrecipients now. So even after the money's all administered, we're still dealing with
School district
changes.
Subservient to us.
Surprise.
Answerable to
The what?
us. Answerable to us.
Explain,
Subservient to.
explain
What
the-
it meant is we received the federal funds, and since we gave it to another governmental agency, they become subrecipients. We still need to account for it, so we need to have an agreement with them that we take on that responsibility. Because we treated it more as a grant, we didn't have them sign all of the documentation that goes along with being a subrecipient because we granted them the dollars.
What happens if they spend the money in a way that is not conducive to the federal government? We're not on the hook, are we?
That was the reason for the subrecipient grant, agreements to be in place, is that put them in that mix with us. Because we treated it as a grant, we got all the documentation of what they were going to spend the money on beforehand. We reviewed it and made sure it complied with what the federal government had. We treated it as they weren't subrecipients. OSA determined they were, and now they backed out a month later and decided no. Thanks to St. Louis County for putting in a lot of effort to prove that OSA was overstepping a little bit there. So that's modified now. It doesn't change much for us. It just eliminates a finding that's going to be in our financial reports. We don't have that now.
So another question. So the state auditor, they're not auditing, they don't have anything to do with the federal dollars. I mean, they're not testing or, so that's some bean counter out in Washington DC that will look over to see if we're spending it the proper way, right? Or,
So our audit firm is actually looking at that as a federal fund. So they'll look through everything to make sure we complied with the federal guidance and everything that's there. That gets reported back to OSA. OSA and Minnesota Management and Budget are actually responsible for reporting all of those dollars back to the federal government. So with that, the CARES round, we reported to MMB, and then MMB will report back to the federal government when they get closed out, because they got an extension through the end of this year with that money. For this round of money, it's coming direct from the Fed to us, so we'll be directly responsible to the Fed this time. CLA, our audit firm, will again audit that as a single audit. How that's going to look, none of us are really sure yet, because it is a 3-year period. We don't know if that's going to be every single year they're going to look at that exact piece, or every year we have money spent, they're going to look at that. We're not sure where that's going to go yet.
But no bean counter from the federal government will show up here. They will just send them the paperwork and they'll be looking it over there. Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Secret Service might show up, Paul.
Yeah, I know it.
Well, in order
I've
to
been waiting for that.
in order to request these funds, I had to go through the Treasury's portal, which required me to give them a copy of my license front and back. It required them to I had to hold my phone up so it could scan my face and give them my social security number, and then do a background check on me. So I'm pretty sure, all the background check's gonna be here, and Secret Service, if they show up, is gonna come for me, because my name's on it right now.
Good.
I'm hoping I pass. I'm a little worried. All right, so we're gonna move on to trying to make this section a little more lively, maybe. I have to share a screen. Just a second here. This one on. All right, so this is our financial status update. We do this every month. Trying to make it a little more, or a little less boring, because sometimes it feels like this drags on and somebody complains that it gets boring. So we added colors and graphs this time to maybe make it a little more visual so that we can see what it looks like for each department, as well as allow that conversation to occur. Starting with general fund, you can see we are outperforming in revenues. This still is related back to January with that timing issue for how we settled out the taxes at the end of the year. We traditionally also don't budget for that on a monthly basis to show up in January, because this is truly a closeout of the prior year's levy. So it does always look a little funny. We are going to look at trying to modify how that monthly budget looks in 2021 to try and give us a little bit better picture than what this presents to us. But you can see revenue-wise, general fund as a whole is overperforming right now for revenues. On the expense side, we are under our expected budget through April. A lot of this has to do with personnel services and the sheriff's office in particular. Due to reduced staffing, we have a lot of vacancies over there. We're seeing a significant amount of savings on that side, and we'll talk a little bit when we get to sheriff's office here.
So just couple quick questions,
Yep.
Nick. On the investments that we have out there, and I realize we reduced those to supplement our cash flow and that, but the investments that we do have, are they earning at the rate that we would expect them to earn at?
Nowhere near what we would anticipate. At this point, our money market account, I believe, is still around that 0.02% interest rate. So everything that we have out there is at extremely low interest rates. We're being a little more cautious when we reinvest our CDs to try and be short-term, because we do anticipate, and the bank and the wealth advisors are anticipating that we will see interest rates climb back up as we go forward. So we're trying to be a little more short-term in those to hope to capture that quicker, so we can get back to higher interest rates. But right now, interest rates across the board in all of our investments are very low, well under what we anticipated. We're at, I believe, 46% of what we anticipated for budget at this point of the year.
So my question is really, do we have them invested in the right place to make sure that, the more longer term, we have some in the long term, and those are the ones I'm kind of addressing here. Do we have those invested in the right place to earn what we would expect for that dollar amount?
Yes, Bremer is constantly looking at that for us. And the trust side, they are frequently going through all of our investments and moving them and shifting them around to ensure that we get the best return we can possibly get. We're government, we're limited in what we can invest in, so that does limit what that potential revenue source can be, but they are constantly moving and shifting that around for us to try and get the best return. The CDs that we talk about, that's stuff that we are managing outside of the trust That's our cash flow that's sitting, that's restricted or committed in some form that we can't touch for operational expenses beyond what they're designated to. Those get invested. And right now, we have, I believe, 4 or 5 CDs that are still sitting out there that are long-term ones that are going to be maturing over the next coming years. But everything else that we have is in shorter-term investments right now, trying to anticipate the possibility of higher interest rates.
Okay, and then on the expense side, what I've noticed is a sort of a consistency throughout, I think, our organization, and you can tell me if it's true or not, but where we're reducing our expenses is based on positions not being filled. And is that a major concern? I realize the sheriff, for him, it's a major concern. I see in Kara's area, $155,000 there that's related to not filling, that's probably a couple, 2 or 3 positions. So saving dollars, and I want to be careful that we don't think that we're working more efficiently, we just don't have the people there, and then are we losing something in terms of providing services because those positions aren't filled? So the other side of the argument is, if we're not losing services and we're still providing them, do we need those positions? That would be the other side of it.
I was just gonna say the same thing.
So that's my concern, is that we're not getting to a point where we think that we don't need them, because we may need them for capacity purposes, that we're just kind of limping along at this point. That's my concern.
Yep, and the majority of the savings that we are seeing, especially in the personnel side, is due to vacant positions and the time it takes us to refill that. That isn't uncommon. The dollar amounts that we're seeing now is uncommon. But traditionally, we've seen as somebody retires or another person leaves, it takes us a month or a month and a half to replace that, so we get the savings from that time frame. Plus, usually hiring them is typically at a lower rate than the outgoing. As our tenure starts to shrink, I know Mel was telling me the other day that we were at an average of 9-year tenure when she came. We're down to about 8. As that starts to shrink, that savings from one person leaving and rehiring another person gets a little smaller, especially with the market that we're seeing right now for employment. We're having a struggle finding people to fill roles. And the ones that you're finding are coming in at rates that are either at what the outgoing person was at or a little bit higher. So it does cause some challenge for us there. But the vacant positions are the reason right now. And talking to the SMT members is where you're going to gather if that's positions that they have to have or if there's opportunities for us to reduce some of those positions. What I've heard so far is majority of those positions are positions they need to have that they're just struggling to fill.
So another one of my concerns is that, the unemployment rate has had some frosting put on the dollars that those individuals are getting. That's going to go away, and there's a big concern by some of those people that in September, that's going to, or even prior to September, those benefits might end, which we could argue both ways, that'll be good and bad, but I think that there might be a potential for more people to come back into the working class than sitting out there and taking on, their unemployment benefits, because they're pretty robust at this point. And I think that's deterred some people, a certain group of people, from applying for jobs. The problem is they will have been out of work for so long that maybe they aren't, technology and processes all move along regardless of whether you're participating or not. So I'm not sure about the quality of applicants at that point. Commissioner?
I was just going to say that, Mr. Chair, you do a fine job of coming up with some very kind and gentle words and putting a little frosting on. I thought it was great. That's a great choice of words.
I think long and hard about what I'm going to say.
I know.
Let's have
I
Commissioner
just
Coring
kinda-
repeat what you just said.
You don't want to hear my word about it.
Oh, I do.
It's not frosting.
One of the other side effects of that too is you're seeing some of the market rates for positions start to increase because of that. Walmart, I heard the other day, $17.50 to work an overnight shift there, plus $2 premium to work overnight or during the summer months.
Really?
So $19.50 an hour to work at Walmart it's going to drive inflation in wages. So we're gonna have to be watching that as we go forward too, of what that impact's gonna be on not just us, but the community as a whole.
That's a good point.
I know at a Target, not this Target, but Target down south, $15 an hour they were starting at people at, $15 an hour.
Yeah. I think that's Target starting wage now.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, so getting a little further into the weeds with the general fund here, we have Sheriff's Office. Here we do see that we are a little bit behind in our budgeted revenues. The explanation they have for that right now is our federal grants are under the expected amount right now. That's one of those areas that we have to spend the money to get the money. We haven't spent it, so you see that savings on the expense side right now, so the revenues are a little bit behind. They do anticipate being able to still spend that money. It's just coming up in the future months. We also see that our miscellaneous revenue is under the expected. Primary driver there is reduction in inmate population. We are not getting the same amount of revenues from the lack of inmates from outside sources.
We did see, and I don't know if this is a trend, but, you know, the sheriff indicated the other day that they shut down another pod over there. And does that look like it's a long-term situation for them over there? And I don't know if somebody's online that can answer that question.
I think Dan was online. I don't know if he can answer the question, but.
I know from what I've heard from them so far, they do anticipate that as the pandemic subsides, as people get back out into the community and do their normal things, that they anticipate that to grow again. But I always caution that we need to watch and be slow to move forward with that to make sure that that's actually the case.
And that should impact, you know, because he indicated some of the open positions they have are over there in the jail. Whether they bring those back sooner rather than later, or later rather than sooner.
Yep, that should have an impact, and that's based on the Department of Corrections on what they require for minimum staffing. So depending on the pods that we have open, depending on how many inmates we have, determines what our staffing levels need to be. So that, having a pod closed can definitely have an impact on what that's going to look like going forward.
Do you know what the occupancy is at the jail right now?
That would be a great question for Dan if he knows.
Yeah, this is Dan. I do not know what the actual occupancy level is at. I know that the DOC, they were down to 0 here, I think starting back in March, middle of March. But I know the sheriff did indicate that he talked to Beltrami County as well too, and it sounded like they were, I think it was last week, they might have been getting in several, 5 to 10 inmates from up there. Other than that, yeah, the occupancy level, I'm not sure exactly what that's at. I can get that for you as well too, and shoot you off where they're at as of today.
Okay. Dan, before you go, another question on these federal grants, that we spend the money, we front the money first and then bill the federal government for the reimbursement. Is there a set timeline when you bill for that, or a dollar amount before you can actually submit? And
What we do, we submit it on it's for the bomb squad grants. We submit that on a quarterly basis.
okay.
And yeah, there's no set dollar amount. It's just at the end of the quarter that the expense occurred that we send the billing in. It's called a financial summary report that we send in on a quarterly basis. And with the bomb grant itself, this year was a little lacking on the state side. They didn't get it back to us until the approved piece, which you guys seen, it was on the board, I think, about a month ago, and you guys signed out, or you signed off on that as well too. And we just got the executed copy probably a week after. And as you know, everything is on back order as well too. We sent out purchase orders right after we got the final executed copy, and most of the stuff is 6 to 8 weeks out before we would even see it. So it's just a little lag in everything in the whole process. So.
Okay, well, thank you. That clarifies it, that there's some lag on our end in getting things that we are trying to purchase, and then a lag on the federal side to get us our money back and that, so. And so I didn't think about that one aspect of where we can't get our supplies when we order them. I was thinking that then quarter over quarter, that wouldn't be a reason that we would see a difference in the revenues, that it would sort of level itself out over time. But given that we're struggling to get, we put the order in and we have to wait 6 to 8 weeks to get it, that impacts the whole process. So thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
So jumping into the sheriff's side, expense side, here we see that we are under budget. A good portion of that is that personnel services. Having those open positions is saving us a lot of money at this point. I know it does create some challenges for them as well, but it does save us a significant amount of dollars. Along that, we have service and charges that in the last few months, we've been talking about how that's been trending under due to legal fees for some personnel things. That has now offset the savings we've been seeing there. That has balanced out through April. Keep in mind that this is 4 months out of the year. This will change every single month, and we may see that the savings come back. It may not have as much of an impact in the future months. Supplies and materials are also under budget for them as well. The primary expense reduction there is, again, the inmate population. We aren't seeing those investments or expenses in meals and other items. It helps us reduce our costs throughout the jail. Land services side, revenue is well above what we've anticipated. The primary driver here is our permits and our charges for services. So the recorder's fees drive a lot of this. We are still seeing a significant amount of pieces come through here. We have a lot of permits being applied for, and that just drives that revenue up drastically for them. So we see a pretty good position across the board for land services revenue side. Expense side, we're trending pretty much right on where we expect to be at this point. The expense side area that they didn't really have much to call out in that area because we are sitting at 99.1%. There are some areas that were a little over budget and others that were under budget that balance each other out. There's nothing that was significant of note at this point.
So Nick, when I look at land services and particularly about Mr. Free's portion of the business organization, I just wonder when I see that tremendous amount of permits being pulled, and does that area, have you heard anything about that area having or not having the capacity to handle the amount of business that's going through there? And given the timelines that they're constricted to get some of this done, I look at the PCOB being out until after 7 o'clock doing their on-site visits and that, and so the whole process seems to be getting very overloaded, at least from my perception.
It is a concern, and it's a concern that Gary and I have been talking about now for 6 months. You can see from the revenue, could you go back one page, Nick? You can see from the revenue that that's an indication of our workload compared to what we thought it was going to be. And so that is a gap. I'm encouraging Gary to say, those are also resources that you can use on a temp basis
Right.
to bring some resource in to help deal with maybe some of the simpler tasks, copying, mailing, putting a packet together, or whatever. And so that's the tool we use in the short term. If this continues, then we should be evaluating what's the correct staffing level for that long term. We resist doing it until we know it's permanent.
Right.
And so is this a bubble? I think it is at some point because it is so hot right now. Recorder's office, we invested in new software for them. Knock on wood, they're keeping up. They're doing okay. Environmental services, yes, it's a struggle.
And that was my thought, is, you know, we don't know if it's just a bubble and will it burst at some point, and I'm certainly not in favor of hiring permanent staff when I think probably it is a bubble. We've seen that, I think, consistently over the years. So it's not something to address on the long term, but I am concerned about the short term on that.
On governance services, this is a fairly small budget, so it looks really significant when you put it in a chart. But the main driver here for revenues being outperforming is the amount of charges that the attorney's office has been able to apply this year. They are seeing increased volume as well, so they're seeing increased revenue there. On the expense side, we are trending within the boundaries of where we anticipate to be by the end of April here. You do see that little spike in February, but you see that we were under in January. That was a timing piece. We anticipated the expense to be in January. It hit us in February, so it's just a timing piece there.
My first thought here was that Attorney Ryan just raised his prices and got some big dollars out of that, but that's probably not true.
Probably not, but you never know. There are attorneys.
Well, he talks about his math over there, so I'm always concerned about that.
He likes his attorney math. Administrative services, we are trending behind in our revenues. Am I on the right page here? Yeah. We are trending behind in revenues overall throughout this year. It isn't, I don't know if I have the right chart here. Something seems off on this. Because I have that we are at 105.5% in revenues, so I'm going to have to look at this one a little bit closer. I'll give you an update on what this chart really looks like, because something's
Nick,
iffy
what
in
would the
this one.
administrative services revenue stream be? Where were the revenues coming from?
Our primary revenues in, I'm going to stop sharing so I can pull this up, so I can give you the exact pieces here. So administrative services is facilities, finance, elections, county extension, IT, and human resources. The majority of our revenue is within taxes. We do also have miscellaneous fees that hit us here for interfund transfers for rents and royalties. We also have the rents and royalties that we receive from Brainerd here for the work that we do with them on our facilities side, as well as any other internal space that's rented by outside agencies. We are at $326,000 through the end of April, was what our budget was. We currently have $344,000 revenue, so we are trending a little bit ahead. The main area that we're trending ahead in is charges for services, and that is in our contract revenue from the city of Brainerd. I'm going to blame the auditors. That's why that chart's off.
So we're talking administrative services right now, right?
Yep.
So is our contract with Brainerd been impacted by their perhaps lack of need for services at all? Debbie's stepping up here.
Mr. Chair, if you recall, we did reduce the contract with the city of Brainerd by right-sizing the number of hours that were requested. As we talked about at that time, we still haven't had a normal year since we started that contract with them. The first year, they were under construction with their master plan. They were not really requiring our maintenance services as such. What we did, and then we had COVID. So what we did was take a look at what we felt was right-sized hours for the work that was being done. We added in HVAC service and lawn maintenance at the library to build some of those hour capacities. So we were able to keep that contract pretty much neutral, bringing those hours down to, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I want to say it was like 50 some hours a month or something to that effect, where we were able to bring it to the right level that both our facilities team and the city of Brainerd felt was comfortable. As we've continued, we just reviewed it for the first quarter in 2021, and we're right on trend with where we should be with that at this point in time.
Okay, just another quick question. In terms of our entire organization, we talk about the reduction of, in use of water and electricity. Is that due to a lot of the employees working from home
Yes.
directly?
Yes, that, and, you know, we talked, the sheriff said on Tuesday that we've got a pod closed at the jail. It's not technically closed from the standpoint of it being mothballed. We still have utilities and costs that are expended there. We're still flushing toilets and running sinks and all that kind of thing. But the actual usage is not as much as it would be if it was fully housed with prisoners in every one of those cells as well. So we have some savings there, but mainly from the reduction of the number of employees who have been on site.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I think either Tim or Deb can answer this, but as you look, like right now on the screen, this is awesome where people can be at their desk working or wherever they're at. They're not here, sitting here. They can, you know, because I can remember county board meetings that would go 2 hours and before COVID, it'd be all full of staff sitting here. We're going to continue on with this, aren't we? This
Yes.
Microsoft Teams. I mean, this is great.
Teams and Zoom and all of the video chat type of platforms that there are numerous ones of, that's probably one of the biggest benefits that came to our working environment out of COVID, from the standpoint that there are multiple ways, like you said, the productivity of our employees can increase while they are still being present and participating in things like this as well.
That brings up another question. Did we ever gauge whether people's productivity, whether they're here or they're at home, are they getting the same amount of work done, or don't we even know the answer to that?
I don't know which one of you, I know that's more on either of your bailiwicks. You've been measuring it, KRS,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Coring, I appreciate the question. We have seen increased productivity for folks working from their home location or an alternative work site because there aren't the in-office interruptions or things that get in the way of getting the work done when you're in the building. We have significant measures in place, so we know, bless you, which staff are getting what work done, and we're able to track where they're putting in their time. And we're really confident about saying that productivity has increased with you offering that opportunity to work elsewhere.
I would think that that's probably similar for finance and IT. We know they can work from anywhere, thank goodness. They can solve our problems regardless of where they're at. But so I think that there are some real benefits that have come out of this situation.
Definitely.
And I would just remind you that what that has done is when these things came into play, it made employees 24/7 employees, and working from home allows them to work whenever it's convenient for them, but also to get the work done. So they're not working probably the traditional 8 to 4 or 8 to 5 type hours. They may be working at 7, 8 o'clock at night to get some of the paperwork done, and that's my perception of what takes place, having been a person who got caught in that windstorm at one time.
Can I ask another question?
Well, you're getting close to the limit.
So you said that the on-site visit, so what, you know, Jake called me at it was like 7 o'clock at night. So do staff members, do they get comp time, or how does that work? Because, these guys are working their rear end off, and do they get, how does that work, Tim?
I think I'm not sure the law has kept up with society. And by that I mean, Jake calls at 7 o'clock at night. Now, Jake is a salaried employee. It does not have any marginal difference in our costs. And in this context of work when the work is necessary, as long as Jake is balancing
Right.
his personal life needs, then I don't care that he's working at 7 at night. What I do care is if he's working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 5 days a week,
Right.
because we're going to burn him out and we're going to lose him. We also have, those are folks that are exempt from the overtime,
Okay.
salaried. Then we have a whole group of people that are not exempt from overtime. And this is where I think the law has not necessarily kept up. To your point, I've gotten emails from, or text messages from Therese when it is well outside of working hours. But it is because she got something, and you're right, we're now lassoed to our jobs 24/7, and that is compensable. And so I don't think the law has really kept up with the fact that we are much more connected than we once were, and maybe sending a text message at 7 isn't enough to trigger that. That's how we've been operating. If it is to the point where someone is actually working, then it's compensable if they're not exempt from overtime.
Right.
Well, I will say I appreciate you, Tim, because I know that it was last weekend, I believe I sent you an email. I don't know, it might have been 6 o'clock on Friday, and you responded over the weekend, so there we are. Apparently you were looking at your emails, I mean, so we do. Appreciate it.
Floor is yours again, Nick.
And Commissioner Barrows kind of jumped ahead of us on the administrative side here for expenses. The main savings that we're seeing there is in our maintenance supplies and in our services area for, Yep. We saw the savings there from just the reduction in staff that were out or in the building, reducing our expenses there. Come on. The technology's great until this stuff happens.
Call ITT. IT. One T.
That's not what you were supposed to go to.
Oh, as long as
Their
we've got a
content.
second here, you asked about how many people were in the jail. I went into the inmate lookup, and it says up-to-date county building status, there's 109 people
109 people?
that are in the building.
Now technology's great because it's working.
Yeah.
Jumping into highway, revenue side, and last time we talked a lot about timing. Highway is always a timing piece. They did pull in revenues for the state projects early. So their revenue is way above where we anticipated. Along that, local option sales tax continues to perform better than anticipated, so we still see that slow growth in local option sales tax. That's offset by significant savings and expenses, which throws them way off, but it's timing with project payments. Work has started, but payments haven't gone out yet. So we see that expense being well below what we anticipated at this point. For highway, it's a guessing game of when is the snow going to come out, when is the frost going to be out, when can they actually get trucks on the road to start the work. So we see this every year that their monthly looks really bad until we get to the end of construction season, then we kind of catch up. Along with that, though, we did see savings in salt over the winter, and we also see reductions in fuel usage. You would think that since we went to COVID regulations out there and have staff being one person per vehicle, that we would see increases in fuel expenses, but they are actually capturing the fuel expense for the county as a whole through their budget. So if we're not out patrolling as much, we see the fuel cost reduction there. We see fuel cost reduction in not moving those trucks around as much too. Plowing doesn't occur, fuel costs go down. So we saw savings there as well.
I would assume the mild winter and the not using the salt the way we would normally have to use it
Yep,
contributed to the reduction in expenses.
yes.
But does that, when we talk about maintenance of vehicles, then we're not running them at the same number of hours, and there must be a reduction in that, in the maintenance.
We do see some savings in the supplies and materials as well.
And
It's not
are
a
we-
very significant amount, but there is savings there.
Are we having that same impact as the sheriff's department when we're trying to order parts for our vehicles, that there's a lag time in getting those?
On the parts side, I haven't heard much of a lag, but on ordering new vehicles, all the replacement vehicles, we're seeing that lag really play out in every vehicle that we're ordering in.
Okay.
That's where we're seeing most of the delays so far.
So looking at, and I know I just looked at a new car and compared it to the one I currently have, and the price had gone up significantly. Are we seeing that same thing for fleet vehicles?
We quoted early, so we have fixed costs. It's through the state contract, so it's a little more controlled. But I anticipate going forward, 2022, 2023, we're gonna see that hit us.
Shortage, yeah.
I think we're gonna see that in our supplies and materials as well. We're gonna see filter costs go up. We're gonna see oil costs go up. We're gonna see fuel costs go up. So highway is digging into that pretty intensely right now as we start into the budget cycle to try and anticipate what next year's going to look like, knowing that there's inflation in a lot of those pieces. And we've seen that in the past, go back a few years, and we saw bit prices were climbing. We saw that all that stuff was coming about. So we try to anticipate it as best as we can, and sometimes we win, sometimes we are off.
And Mr. Chair, I have no worry whatsoever about the county administrator getting here to work because he doesn't have to worry about a chip in the vehicle that he drives. I don't know if you know, there is a apparently there's a worldwide chip shortage.
Yep.
And I was over at Tanner's and I said, geez, the lot looks kind of empty. Can't get any vehicles. It's gonna be,
They order them on the computer and hope that they can get them.
yeah. You don't have a chip in that truck, do you? Yeah, exactly.
All right, jumping into community services. On the revenue side, we're at 123.51%. We still see that a little bit of that impact from the revenue from property taxes in January. Again, that's one of those timing pieces, plus not having that truly budgeted out for January. It has a little bit of an impact there. We also see that our state revenues are higher because we received more than we anticipated from DHS. Federal revenues, same concept there. We're seeing increased revenues above and beyond what we anticipated through this point.
So question for Kara. CW targeted casework. CW stands for Crow Wing?
No, child welfare.
Child welfare. And could you just give a quick synopsis why some of these are, why we're getting more dollars here than,
I would be happy to, sir.
it seems like if we care for a child, there would be a certain amount of reimbursement, but we're saying it's this instead of this.
Well, it still could be this, but we're getting out and seeing more children and more frequently, and so we're reimbursed for those times where we get out to see the kiddos more frequently. So increased visits equals increased revenue in terms of targeted case management. In terms of the state dollars, our adult mental health initiative, our fourth quarter reimbursement, which we received this year, was more than we had anticipated. We also are still counting our emergency shelter award, which was a part of that state revenue piece. Federal dollars, our WIC budget, we receive, so we go over budget in WIC, but we are made whole the following year. So we went over budget in WIC for 2020, and we received that final payout for WIC from the state in 2021. So there was that. The TCM is increased. Gifts and contributions, we received a nice $10,000 donation from the Child Protection Team. And then both our MA recoveries and our estate recoveries, not necessarily higher, but we thought we were going to get the payment in May. We received it in April, kind of thing.
So for clarification, because Commissioner Coring brought up the rental of the rooms down at the old Holiday Inn.
Yes, sir.
And under that emergency shelter award, did that cover that expense 100% down there?
It did, and we will be bringing that to you at an upcoming Committee of the Whole meeting. We are no longer providing the sheltering. Those dollars ended, so that work has ended in March, I believe. But we will bring to you the number sheltered, the number we were able to find permanent housing for, the number that went to treatment, also the dollars that were funneled back into the community. So we paid dollars to Econo Lodge, and a pretty significant amount of dollars that could have potentially helped their business stay afloat during COVID. So we'll bring all of that whole summary to you guys, so you have an idea of what happened there.
So, two more things,
Yes.
and I'm sure you're watching this, but one of the proposals at the state legislature right now is a reduction in the SHIP grant.
Yep.
How do you see that impacting your budget, if they would pass that through? currently it's not in force, but,
So because we partner with Essentia and our employees for SHIP are through Essentia, it may not have as significant an impact. We're more of a pass-through for those dollars. But what it would impact is our ability then to do those preventative services out in the community. And we have big plans for SHIP coming up, which you'll hear as part of our budget presentation as well. So it'd be really unfortunate if those dollars were cut.
and the second one is, and I'm not aware of what the cost shifts that are being considered through legislation, and I don't know if you could shed some light on maybe more of the particulars of that, but just overall, that's a concern to me that again, the state is pushing stuff to the county level and then expecting us not to raise levies and that to cover those costs.
Right.
And I find that to be difficult to accept.
One of the cost shifts that we're concerned about is related to placement of juveniles in facilities, much like we have our adults placed in state-operated facilities, and we have a county cost share for that. They're looking at implementing that cost share for us related to the juvenile population. So we're doing some analysis to see what that impact would look like. There are a number of potential cost shifts. I was trying to listen to one this morning related to healthcare, which I don't have a ton of information on, but I'm trying to track that as well. Corrections, they were looking at potentially decreasing some funding there, which is a significant concern because those programs are not nearly fully funded. So we've got some concerns with that as well. So there could be some significant hits to our budget moving forward.
Okay. And I just want to keep a thumb on that kind of stuff because that's going to hurt us or potentially hurt us come August and that when we start considering our own budget. So thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
And the only other thing I want to share, Commissioner and Nick, I don't know, oh, you're at expenses, excellent. So our personnel expenses are at 97.13%, which is under. I wanted just to draw your attention, I'm not sure how this is going to impact it yet, but there are some staff who have been incorrectly charged to another department related to retiree insurance. While we would really like for those other departments to keep those folks, apparently they have to come back to us. And so that will impact what our budget looks like related to that retiree insurance and the personnel expenditures. So you may see it go up, is what I'm saying, and
Okay.
just be aware of that.
We'll be updated at a personnel meeting on that subject?
That should actually be on the budgetary side.
Budgetary side?
The
Okay.
staff themselves should have been allocated to their department correctly. It's on the budget side when to build the budget, we import this stuff constantly. And there are so many changes that occur to the Oregon object codes that relate to that staff. Sometimes it gets messed. We
Okay.
have hundreds and hundreds of lines that come in. They were misappropriated to the wrong fund on the budgetary side. On the expense side, they should be accurate.
So
Okay,
just drawing your attention to
Yep.
that going forward.
thank you.
I'm going to try and keep my computer alive long enough to make sure we make it through the end of this. It says 10 minutes. So we're on a time crunch.
Have you got much left? Because
Nope, we got the expense side and cash flows real quick, and
Can I just ask another question of Tim? Tim, this putting money aside for OPEB or for the, for future paying for that, I mentioned this to Steve the other day, when I was in the legislature, you'd have, I don't know who to pick on, but let's just say one entity here that was very fiscally responsible, and they were planning ahead, years ahead. This entity here was not really planning, and they were just not as fiscally responsible. And then when there was a crisis, this entity would get no money really at all, and this one would get bailed out. So I'm just wondering, I wonder if we really even need to set aside money for that into the future, or maybe we should just not even worry about it. What do you think?
Right now, we're not.
I know we're not now, but I mean, we have in the past.
I'm not
$100,000.
advocating that you should.
Pardon me?
I'm not advocating that we should.
Okay.
Think about it like a bell curve, right? And it was this
Right.
peak that we were worried about,
Right.
we're about right here. We're already there. It's too late. There's no good reason to set aside funds for OPEB to shave off the peak. We're
Okay.
in the peak. It made sense 13 years ago. Today, it doesn't make good sense. To your point, yes, you know it as well as I do. People get rewarded for bad behavior sometimes. It only reminds me of what I got to tell my teenagers. The fair is something that happens in St. Paul. That's the only place you're going to find it in life.
We just received our actuarial on our OPEB portion. We're
Yes.
about 30,000 from our peak right now.
Okay.
So we're right there at the top end of that. Community services expense side, we are at 92.1% of budget, and now you will have to rely on the sheets of paper. My computer died. Again, technology. We are under budget in foster home placement and corrections placements. It makes up the majority of our savings there. We are also under in personnel expenses through this point. All good things, but looking at our past, we are being aware that there are other aspects of what community services does that we have to be watching. So far, the good news is the good news. This is what we see for savings. We don't anticipate too many issues unless things change, and it's community services, things will change. On our cash flow side, I provided an actual historical look of our unrestricted cash. You can see where we are trending. The dark blue bar is where we are at this point. Keep in mind that is because we don't have as many of our dollars tied up in investments, which brings them back into our unrestricted cash. We also have, of the just over $10 million we have in unrestricted cash, $9 million of that is highway alone. So the other areas of our unrestricted cash are not as positive. Primarily, community services is about $2 million negative in unrestricted cash at this point. So it does drive home the fact that we are still needing to focus on that fund balance growth to make sure we are in a good position across all areas, not just the aggregate. Any questions on cash flow?
Nope.
At this point, we think we're sitting very well for the low points this year versus, as you can see, the last 2 years were not very positive. We should be in a much better position this year.
I think that's good news, and I think it's a compliment that this county is able to walk that tightrope through those periods of struggle, and I think that you guys have done a great job. The whole organization has done a great job of trying to get through those times and has gotten through those times. We just can't let our guard down at this point, would be my message. So we need to continue to operate the way we are, and just compliment all of you folks on what you've done to get us here. It was a real scary moment there.
As we're on the subject of compliments, I want to compliment my team downstairs. We did get the award from GFOA for our popular annual financial report for 2019 finally. So I want to congratulate them on their hard work in making sure we put together a document that fits all the needs of GFOA and anybody from the outside, that they're getting a high-quality document that gives insight into what we are doing here.
And pass our congratulations on to them also.
Will do.
If any of them are on the line, congratulations.
Did I miss the compliments?
Nope.
Did you
Oh, a
pass anything
compliment?
my
Yes.
way, or?
No, I complimented all of our staff on
You're
getting
probably
us-
going to order me to go back to video of less questions by video. More questions when I'm here.
We just shut you off.
That's the great part about it.
So Commissioner Coring reminded me, and I'll just make this public, that May 15th is the Memorial Day for peace officers. That's done annually on May 15th, so let's remember the ones that have passed away, the ones that have been injured, and in whatever degree, they have a tough job to do, so let's remember them, and it's the whole week for peace officers. May 15th is reserved for the ones who have been injured or passed away. So thank you to our peace officers for the job they do. Anything else? Apparently, I'm the one who speaks the most today. So with that, I'll say our meeting is adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.